I sat in the courthouse hallway clutching a manila envelope while watching my sister Carmen laugh with her attorney. 7 years of my life sacrificed working double shifts at Morrison Warehouse to pay for her medical school tuition, believing family meant everything. Now she was suing me for our late grandfather's entire inheritance, claiming I deserved nothing because sacrifice was my only purpose in this family. The bailiff's voice echoed through the marble corridor, calling our case number. As I stood up, my fingers tightened around the envelope containing evidence that would change everything forever. The whole nightmare started 7 years ago, when Carmen got her acceptance letter to Northwestern Medical School. I can still picture her dancing around our cramped apartment in Lincoln Park, waving that thick envelope like a victory flag. She was 18 then, fresh out of high school with perfect grades and dreams bigger than our small Chicago neighborhood could contain. Our parents had died in a head-on collision 2 months earlier. Dad was driving home from his second job at the print shop when a drunk driver ran a red light on Ashland Avenue. Mom died instantly. Dad lasted 3 days in intensive care before his injuries claimed him too. I was 21, Carmen was 18, and suddenly we were orphans with nothing but each other and our grandfather Harold. Harold was 74, a retired postal worker, living on Social Security and a modest pension. He had about $40,000 in savings and a small house in Oak Park that he'd owned since the 1970s. When Carmen got into medical school, the tuition alone was $52,000 per year, not counting living expenses, books, or the 1,000 other costs that come with pursuing a medical degree. I had just started my second year at community college, studying mechanical engineering. The plan was to transfer to University of Illinois after getting my associate degree. I was working part-time at a gas station and living at home to save money. Life wasn't glamorous, but it had direction. Everything changed the day Carmen came home crying because the financial aid office told her the family contribution expected from our household was more than grandfather's entire annual income. She sat at our kitchen table surrounded by loan applications and financial forms, sobbing that her dreams were dead before they started. I made the decision that night without really thinking it through. I dropped out of school the next morning and applied for a full-time position at Morrison Warehouse. The work was brutal, but the pay was steady. $12 an hour for loading and unloading delivery trucks with overtime available whenever I wanted it. I started working 60-hour weeks immediately. My daily routine became a grinding cycle of physical exhaustion. Wake up at 4:30 in the morning, shower with ice-cold water because our apartment's hot water heater was broken and we couldn't afford to fix it. Drive to the warehouse in my beat-up Honda Civic, the one with the cracked windshield and the heater that only worked when it felt like it. From 5 in the morning until 6 at night, I loaded boxes weighing anywhere from 20 to 80 pounds onto delivery trucks. Cases of bottled water, furniture components, industrial equipment, restaurant supplies. My back ached constantly. My hands developed permanent calluses. During Chicago's brutal winters, the warehouse loading dock felt like working inside a freezer. During summer, it was like being trapped in an oven. Lunch was usually a peanut butter sandwich and a bag of generic chips from the vending machine. Dinner was whatever I could make from the discount groceries I bought on Sunday afternoons. Pasta with butter canned soup, bologna sandwiches. I lost 20 pounds that first year, not from any diet plan, but because I was choosing between eating well and keeping Carmen in medical school. Every month, I sent Carmen $1,500 for tuition payments, another $800 for her apartment near campus, $200 for books and study materials. Sometimes she needed extra money for lab fees or medical equipment. I never said no. Carmen would call me every Sunday night to tell me about her classes, organic chemistry, anatomy, and physiology, pathology. She described her professors, her study groups, the hospital rotations where she was learning to actually practice medicine. Her voice always carried this excitement that made all my sacrifice feel worthwhile. She sent me thank you cards for my birthday and Christmas, pictures from campus showing her in her white lab coat smiling beside expensive microscopes and anatomical models. She looked so professional, so accomplished. In every photo, she radiated the confidence of someone who belonged in that world of medicine and healing. When our grandfather Harold passed away 2 years ago, Carmen was finishing her final year of medical school. The cancer took him quickly, just 3 months from diagnosis to funeral. At the service, Carmen stood beside me at the graveside, both of us crying as they lowered his simple wooden casket into the ground. After the ceremony, as relatives shared stories about Harold's kindness and work ethic, Carmen pulled me aside near the parking lot of Graceland Cemetery. She grabbed my hands and looked directly into my eyes with tears streaming down her cheeks. "Stefan, I promise you that once I graduate and start my residency, we'll split everything equally. The house, his savings, everything. You've sacrificed so much for my education, and I'll never forget that. We're going to take care of each other just like grandfather would have wanted." I believed her completely. Why wouldn't I? She was my sister, the person I had given up my own dreams to support. Family meant everything to both of us, or so I thought. Harold's will was straightforward. Everything split equally between his 2 grandchildren. The house was worth about $120,000, though it needed significant repairs. His savings account contained $42,000. Not a fortune, but enough to help both Carmen and me build better futures. But 3 months ago, everything changed. Carmen graduated from Northwestern with her medical degree and immediately accepted a residency position at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles. I expected her to call me about settling the inheritance before she moved across the country. Instead, I received legal papers delivered by a process server to my apartment door. Carmen was suing me for the entire inheritance. Not just her half, but my half too. According to the lawsuit, she deserved everything because of her superior contribution to the family legacy through her medical degree. The legal filing claimed I was unfit to inherit anything because I had no education, no professional prospects, and no ability to honor grandfather's memory properly. It described me as someone who had wasted his opportunities and lacked the character necessary to be entrusted with family assets. Reading those papers felt like being punched in the stomach. Every word was designed to make me sound worthless, lazy, and undeserving. The sister I had sacrificed everything for was now arguing in court that my sacrifice proved I was inferior to her. But the real shock came when I was cleaning out grandfather's house last month, preparing it for sale, as the legal process moved forward. I found Carmen's old journal wedged behind a loose board in the bedroom closet, where she used to sleep when visiting Harold during college breaks. The journal entries were dated from just 2 weeks after grandfather's funeral, page after page of detailed plans about how to get the full inheritance. Carmen had written about researching legal strategies to contest the will. She had calculated exactly how much money she could claim based on different arguments about family contribution and worthiness. One entry dated March 15th, 2 years ago, made my blood run cold. "Stefan is too trusting and too emotional to see this coming. He actually thinks his warehouse job makes him some kind of family hero. By the time I'm done, he'll realize that his whole purpose was to serve my success. The inheritance will just be the final proof that I was always the important one." She had been planning this betrayal for 2 years. Every thank you card, every grateful phone call, every promise about splitting everything equally had been part of an elaborate lie. While I was working myself into exhaustion to support her dreams, she was plotting to steal my future. Standing in that dusty bedroom holding evidence of my sister's calculated cruelty, I realized that everything I believed about family loyalty had been an illusion. Carmen never saw me as her brother and partner. She saw me as a resource to be used and discarded when no longer needed. The warehouse job that I thought demonstrated my love for family was actually seen by Carmen as proof that I deserved nothing better. My willingness to sacrifice was interpreted by her as evidence that sacrifice was all I was good for. As I read more entries in her journal, I discovered that Carmen had always resented having to depend on my support for medical school. Instead of feeling grateful, she felt humiliated that her success depended on someone she considered beneath her potential. The inheritance lawsuit wasn't just about money. It was about erasing any suggestion that my contribution had been important to her achievements. That night, I made a decision that would define the rest of my life. I wasn't going to let Carmen rewrite history and steal both my past sacrifice and my future security. If she wanted a legal battle, I would give her one, but I would fight with truth, not lies. I had no idea how deep her deception really went. The first sign that Carmen's betrayal extended beyond the inheritance lawsuit came when I visited our Aunt Margaret 3 weeks before the court hearing. Margaret was Harold's younger sister, a retired librarian who lived in a tidy bungalow in Forest Park. She had always been warm and welcoming to me, especially after our parents died. But when I knocked on her door that Tuesday afternoon, Margaret's expression was cold and unwelcoming. She stood in her doorway wearing a floral housecoat, her gray hair pulled back severely, and looked at me like I was a stranger who had wandered onto her property by mistake. "I don't think we have anything to discuss, Stefan," she said without inviting me inside. Her voice carried a disappointment that I didn't understand. "Aunt Margaret, I just wanted to talk about the inheritance situation. I thought maybe you could help Carmen and me work this out as a family instead of fighting in court." Margaret's face hardened even further. "After what Carmen told me about your gambling problems and your drinking, I think it's better if you stay away from this family. Harold would be ashamed of what you've become. Gambling problems. Drinking." I stood on her front porch, completely confused, trying to process accusations that made no sense. I hadn't gambled $1 in my entire life, and I barely drank beer except occasionally on weekends. "Aunt Margaret, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. I don't gamble, and I certainly don't have a drinking problem. I've been working at Morrison Warehouse for 7 years to support Carmen's education." Margaret shook her head with disgust. "Carmen showed me the bank statements, Stefan. All those cash withdrawals for poker games and bars. She told me how you complained constantly about supporting her, how you resented every dollar you had to spend on her education. She said you called her selfish and ungrateful behind her back." My stomach dropped as I realized what Carmen had done. She had systematically poisoned our extended family against me by fabricating stories about gambling addiction and financial irresponsibility. Every withdrawal I had made to pay Carmen's expenses was being presented as evidence of my supposed addiction. "Those withdrawals were for Carmen's tuition and living expenses," I explained desperately. "I have receipts, bank transfers, everything documented. I've never complained about supporting her. She's my sister." But Margaret was already closing her door. "Carmen warned me you might try to lie your way out of this. She said the addiction had made you dishonest and manipulative." "I'm sorry, Stefan, but I can't help someone who took advantage of Harold's kindness and threw away every opportunity they were given." The door closed with finality, leaving me standing alone on the porch, where I had spent countless Sunday afternoons as a child helping Margaret tend her garden and listening to her stories about Harold's adventures as a young postal worker. Over the next week, I discovered the full extent of Carmen's character assassination campaign. I called our cousin Robert, Harold's nephew, who had taught me how to change oil in cars when I was 16. Robert's wife answered the phone and told me he didn't want to speak with me anymore. "After what Carmen shared about your problems with money and your attitude toward family obligations, Robert thinks it's best if you don't contact us anymore," she said coldly before hanging up. I tried reaching out to other relatives who had been part of our extended family gatherings for holidays and birthdays. Cousin Linda, who used to invite me to her children's birthday parties. Uncle Frank, who had helped me find my first job at the gas station. Aunt Susan, who had always sent me Christmas cards with $20 bills tucked inside. Every conversation followed the same pattern: cold reception references to problems I didn't have, and disappointment in behavior that never happened. Carmen had systematically contacted every relative we shared and filled their heads with detailed lies about my character and conduct. The breakthrough came when I visited Uncle Jerry Harold's brother-in-law, who lived in Cicero. Jerry was 82 and sometimes spoke more freely than he probably should. When I explained my confusion about the family's sudden hostility, Jerry looked uncomfortable and shifted in his recliner. "Look, Steph and Carmen showed us those text messages where you complained about her being a burden, and those photos of you at the riverboat casino. She was crying when she told us how you'd been stealing money from Harold during his final months." Uncle Jerry: "I've never been to a riverboat casino in my life, and I never sent any text messages complaining about Carmen. Can you show me what she showed you?" Jerry reluctantly retrieved a folder from his desk drawer. Inside were printouts of text message conversations that supposedly showed me complaining bitterly about supporting Carmen's education. The messages were filled with resentment and anger, describing Carmen as ungrateful and selfish. But as I read the messages more carefully, I realized they were fabricated. The phone number listed as mine was close to my actual number, but off by 2 digits. The language and phrasing didn't match how I actually spoke. Carmen had created fake text conversations to support her lies about my attitude. Mixed in with the fake texts were photos that supposedly showed me gambling at a casino. The pictures showed someone who looked similar to me from behind, standing at slot machines and card tables. But when I examined the images more closely, I could see they had been digitally altered. The person in the photos was wearing clothes I didn't own and had a different build than mine. "Uncle Jerry, these photos aren't me. And these text messages aren't from my phone number. Carmen has been lying to everyone in the family." Jerry studied the documents more carefully, and his expression began to change. "The phone number is different," he admitted slowly. "And now that you mention it, this doesn't really sound like how you talk. She's been building a case against me by destroying my reputation with everyone who might support me. She wants the entire family to believe I'm irresponsible and unworthy, so no one will question her taking the full inheritance." Jerry sat quietly for several minutes, processing this revelation. Finally, he looked up with sadness in his eyes. "Stefan, if what you're saying is true, then Carmen has been lying to all of us for months. She came to my house crying, telling us how disappointed Harold would be in your behavior. She made us believe you had betrayed everything our family stood for. I've been working 60-hour weeks for 7 years to pay for her medical school. I've never gambled, never stolen anything, never complained about supporting her. She's taken my greatest act of love and turned it into evidence that I'm a bad person." Uncle Jerry handed me back the folder. "You should keep these. If Carmen fabricated this evidence to fool us, she might be planning to use similar lies in court." Driving home that evening, I realized that Carmen's betrayal was far more sophisticated and cruel than I had initially understood. She hadn't just decided to sue me for the inheritance. She had spent months systematically destroying my relationships with every family member who might have supported me or questioned her actions. By the time she filed the lawsuit, she had already isolated me completely. When relatives heard about the court case, they would automatically assume I was in the wrong because Carmen had already convinced them I was a gambling addict who had been stealing from our grandfather and complaining about family obligations. Carmen understood that inheritance disputes often came down to character and family perception. By making me appear irresponsible and ungrateful, she had stacked the deck in her favor before the legal process even began. But finding Uncle Jerry's folder gave me hope. If Carmen was willing to fabricate evidence to fool our relatives, she might have made similar mistakes in preparing for court. Liars often get careless because they start believing their own stories. I spent that night going through every document, every photo, every piece of supposed evidence that Carmen had used to poison the family against me. Each item revealed small inconsistencies and fabrications that proved her deception. Carmen had been meticulous in her planning, but she had also been sloppy in her execution. She was about to discover that lies have a way of unraveling when exposed to careful scrutiny. The court hearing was 1 week away, and I finally understood the true scope of what I was fighting against. This wasn't just a legal dispute about inheritance money. This was a battle for the truth about who I really was and what I had actually done for my family. Carmen had tried to erase my 7 years of sacrifice and replace it with a fictional narrative about gambling theft and family betrayal. She had weaponized the love and trust of our extended family to support her lies. But she had made one crucial mistake. She had underestimated my determination to fight for the truth, regardless of how much it cost me. The Cook County Courthouse felt like a cathedral of justice as I walked through its marble halls toward courtroom 2B. The inheritance hearing was scheduled for 9 o'clock on a rainy Thursday morning in October. I wore my only good suit, a navy blue outfit I had bought for our parents' funeral 7 years earlier. It was slightly too big now after years of physical labor had changed my body shape. Carmen arrived with her attorney Douglas Hoffman from the prestigious law firm of Hoffman, Barnes and Associates. She looked every inch the successful medical professional in a tailored charcoal suit, her dark hair pulled back in a sophisticated bun. Her makeup was perfect, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who belonged in professional settings. Hoffman was exactly what I expected from an expensive lawyer. Silver hair, expensive suit briefcase that probably cost more than I made in a month. He moved through the courthouse like someone who owned the place, nodding to court clerks and bailiffs who clearly knew him well. I had spent the previous evening in the law library reading about inheritance disputes and trying to understand the legal process. As someone representing himself, I felt completely out of my depth. But hiring an attorney would have cost money I didn't have, and frankly, I wasn't sure any lawyer would have believed my story about Carmen's elaborate deception. Judge Patricia Hensley called the court to order at 9:15. She was a stern-looking woman in her 60s with gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses. Her reputation, according to the legal websites I had researched, was for running an efficient courtroom and having little patience for frivolous arguments. This is a hearing to determine the distribution of the estate of Harold Thomas Kowalski, deceased, Judge Hensley announced. The will specifies equal distribution between the two surviving grandchildren, but the plaintiff, Carmen Kowalski, is contesting that distribution based on claims of misconduct and unfitness by the defendant, Stefan Kowalski. Hoffman stood to present Carmen's case first. His opening statement painted me as an irresponsible and manipulative person who had taken advantage of our grandfather's kindness while contributing nothing meaningful to the family legacy. Your Honor, the evidence will show that Stefan Kowalski systematically exploited his grandfather's trust during Harold Kowalski's final years, while my client Carmen Kowalski was honoring the family's values by pursuing a medical degree. Stefan was engaging in gambling and other irresponsible behaviors that depleted family resources and caused emotional distress to the deceased. Carmen took the witness stand looking composed and professional. Under Hoffman's questioning, she described herself as the dutiful granddaughter who had dedicated her life to becoming a doctor, fulfilling Harold's longtime dream of having a medical professional in the family. My grandfather always talked about how proud he would be if one of us became a doctor. Carmen testified, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. He said that helping people heal was the most noble profession anyone could choose. I dedicated 8 years of my life to making his dream come true. She described her academic achievements, her volunteer work at free clinics during medical school, and her acceptance into a competitive residency program in Los Angeles. Every word was calculated to present herself as someone who had earned the inheritance through merit and dedication. Then Hoffman led her into the accusations against me. Carmen's voice became pained and reluctant, as if discussing my supposed failures caused her emotional distress. Stefan struggled with gambling problems throughout his 20s. She testified falsely. He would disappear for entire weekends, and we later learned he was at riverboat casinos or underground poker games. When our grandfather needed support and care during his illness, Stefan was often unavailable or unreliable. Did Stefan contribute financially to your education? Hoffman asked. He occasionally helped with small amounts, but he constantly complained about the burden and made it clear that he resented every dollar he spent. He said I was selfish for pursuing medical school instead of getting a job immediately after high school. Listening to Carmen's testimony felt surreal. She was describing a completely different person, someone who bore no resemblance to me or my actual behavior. Every fact was twisted or fabricated to support her narrative that I was unworthy of inheritance. But the real shock came when Hoffman announced they had documentation of my supposed theft from grandfather Harold during his final 2 years. He presented bank statements that showed irregular withdrawals from Harold's checking account, withdrawals that coincidentally matched the amounts I had been earning and sending to support Carmen's education. These withdrawals show a pattern of financial manipulation, Hoffman argued. Stefan Kowalski was systematically draining his grandfather's savings, while Harold was vulnerable due to illness and medication. The defendant used his grandfather's declining health to manipulate him into providing money for gambling debts and personal expenses. The documents were professionally prepared and looked completely legitimate. The bank statements showed Harold's account balance decreasing steadily over 2 years, with handwritten notations that supposedly explained the withdrawals as loans to Stefan and help with Stefan's expenses. Carmen broke down in tears on the witness stand as she described discovering this supposed theft. When I realized what Stefan had been doing to our grandfather, it broke my heart. Harold trusted him completely, and Stefan took advantage of that trust in the most cruel way possible. What was your grandfather's mental state during this period? Hoffman asked. The cancer treatments affected his thinking sometimes. He was taking strong pain medications that made him confused and more trusting than usual. Stefan knew this and used it to his advantage. I watched in horror as my own financial sacrifices for Carmen were reframed as theft from our grandfather. The money I had earned through backbreaking labor at Morrison Warehouse was being presented as stolen funds that belonged to Harold. Judge Hensley appeared increasingly sympathetic to Carmen's testimony, especially when she presented herself as the responsible family member trying to protect Harold's legacy while pursuing a career dedicated to healing others. Your Honor, my client has already proven her worthiness through her professional achievements and her dedication to honoring family values, Hoffman concluded. Stefan Kowalski has proven his unworthiness through irresponsible behavior and exploitation of a vulnerable elderly relative. Justice demands that the inheritance go to the person who has earned it through character and contribution. When Judge Hensley asked if I had any questions for Carmen, I stood up with hands shaking from anger and disbelief. I had no legal training, no experience cross-examining witnesses, but I had to try to expose her lies. Carmen, you say I complained about supporting your education? Can you provide any specific examples of when I made these complaints? Carmen looked directly at me with perfect composure. You complained constantly, Stefan? Every time I called home, you made comments about how expensive medical school was and how it was affecting your life. Did you ever record any of these conversations or save any messages where I complained, I didn't think I needed to document my brother's hurtful behavior at the time. I realized I was fighting a losing battle. Carmen was a skilled liar who had clearly prepared for these questions. Without evidence to contradict her testimony, her professional appearance and medical credentials gave her credibility that my warehouse worker background couldn't match. But I noticed something important during her testimony. Several times Carmen's eyes flickered toward Hoffman when answering questions as if checking for approval or guidance. She was performing a rehearsed script, not speaking from genuine memory or emotion. When the court recessed for lunch, I sat alone in the courthouse cafeteria, eating a vending machine sandwich and reviewing my notes. Carmen's testimony was devastating, but it felt too perfect, too coordinated. Real memories have inconsistencies and rough edges. Carmen's story was smooth and polished, like something that had been practiced. I spent the lunch break in the courthouse law library researching inheritance disputes and document authentication procedures. If Carmen was presenting fabricated evidence, there might be ways to challenge its legitimacy. But I was running out of time and options. Carmen's case was compelling, professionally presented, and supported by documents that looked authentic. My only advantage was knowing the truth, and truth without evidence rarely wins in courtrooms. The afternoon session was about to begin, and I suspected Hoffman was preparing to deliver even more damaging revelations about my supposed misconduct. Carmen had the resources, the legal representation, and the credibility advantage. All I had was the manila envelope I had been carrying since the hearing began. Inside were documents I had discovered while cleaning out grandfather's house documents that I hoped might expose the truth about Carmen's elaborate deception. But first, I had to survive whatever new accusation she was preparing to unleash. When court resumed after lunch, Douglas Hoffman announced that Carmen had additional evidence to present. He approached the judge's bench with a manila folder that looked significantly thicker than the morning's documents. Your Honor, during our investigation of this matter, we discovered evidence that Stefan Kowalski's misconduct was even more extensive than originally documented. We have power of attorney documents that show the defendant had legal authority to access Harold Kowalski's accounts during the final months of his life. My blood ran cold as Hoffman distributed copies of legal documents to the judge and to me. The papers appeared to show that I had been granted power of attorney over Harold's financial affairs 6 months before his death. According to these documents, Harold had voluntarily given me complete control over his bank accounts, investments, and financial decisions. The power of attorney form bore Harold's signature and was notarized by someone named Linda Morrison on a date in February 8 months before Harold died. If authentic, this document would legally justify every withdrawal from Harold's accounts that Carmen was now claiming constituted theft. But I knew immediately that the documents were fraudulent. Harold never mentioned granting anyone power of attorney, and he certainly never gave me control over his finances. Despite his cancer diagnosis, Harold remained mentally sharp and independent until his final weeks. He would have discussed such a significant legal decision with both Carmen and me. This power of attorney document proves that Stefan Kowalski had legal access to his grandfather's accounts, Hoffman argued. However, the evidence shows he abused this authority by using the funds for personal expenses rather than legitimate care for Harold Kowalski. Judge Hensley examined the documents carefully. Mr. Kowalski, did you execute this power of attorney with your grandfather? I stood up, trying to keep my voice steady despite the panic coursing through my system. Your Honor, I never signed any power of attorney documents with my grandfather. I've never seen these papers before today. The documents are properly notarized and appear to be in order, Hoffman interjected. Perhaps the defendant has forgotten this legal arrangement due to the stress of caring for an elderly relative. I would remember signing legal documents that gave me control over my grandfather's finances, I replied firmly. This power of attorney is fraudulent. But I realized how my denial sounded to the judge. Of course, someone accused of financial abuse would claim the authorizing documents were fake. Without proof that the power of attorney was forged, my protests looked like desperate attempts to avoid responsibility. During the brief recess, I examined the documents more carefully. The signature that supposedly belonged to Harold looked similar to his actual handwriting, but something felt wrong about the pen pressure and letter formation. The notary seal appeared legitimate, but the notary's name, Linda Morrison, didn't sound familiar. When I returned to my seat, I pulled out my phone and searched for Linda Morrison Notary Public in the Chicago area. The search returned several results, but none of the phone numbers I tried reached anyone who remembered notarizing a power of attorney for Harold Kowalski. The third Linda Morrison I contacted was a retired notary who had stopped practicing 2 years earlier due to health problems. When I described the document and the February date, she became very concerned. I stopped notarizing documents in December, 2 months before the date you mentioned. I would name, she said. If someone used my name and seal after I retired, that's identity theft and document fraud. This was the breakthrough I needed, but I had no way to prove it immediately in court. The hearing was resuming, and I couldn't delay proceedings to track down notary records and retirement documentation. Carmen returned to the witness stand and to testify about the power of attorney documents. Her story was that Harold had asked me to handle his finances because he was becoming confused due to his cancer medications and treatment side effects. My grandfather was having trouble managing his daily responsibilities, Carmen testified. Stefan volunteered to help with paying bills and handling bank transactions. Harold thought it was generous of Stefan to take on that burden. Did Harold discuss this power of attorney arrangement with you? Hoffman asked. He mentioned that Stefan was helping with financial matters, but Harold was often tired and didn't go into detail. I was focused on my final year of medical school and trusted that Stefan was acting in grandfather's best interests. Carmen's testimony was skillfully crafted to explain why she wouldn't have direct knowledge of the power of attorney, while making me appear to be the person who initiated the arrangement for my own benefit. When did you first realize there might be problems with Stefan's handling of your grandfather's finances? Hoffman continued. After Harold died, I was going through his papers to settle the estate. That's when I discovered the pattern of large withdrawals and realized that Stefan had been taking much more money than would be necessary for legitimate expenses. What was your emotional response to this discovery? Carmen paused and took a shaky breath, tears forming in her eyes. I felt completely betrayed. Stefan had used our grandfather's illness and trust to steal money while I was working 18-hour days in medical school, believing that everything was being handled properly at home. The performance was Oscar-worthy. Carmen managed to look both heartbroken and dignified, like someone who had discovered a painful family betrayal, but was bravely seeking justice through proper legal channels. But as I listened to her testimony, I noticed something crucial. Carmen described going through Harold's papers after his death to discover the financial irregularities. Yet the inheritance lawsuit hadn't been filed until 3 months ago, almost 2 years after Harold died. Carmen. I said when Judge Hensley allowed me to cross-examine, you testified that you discovered problems with grandfather's finances while settling his estate after his death. Why did you wait almost 2 years to file this lawsuit? Carmen looked momentarily uncertain, glancing at Hoffman before answering. I needed time to process what I had discovered and to gather all the necessary documentation. Legal action was very difficult for me emotionally. Did you discuss these financial concerns with me at any time during those 2 years? I tried to give you opportunities to explain your actions, but you always changed the subject or made excuses. This was completely false. Carmen and I had spoken regularly during the 2 years after Harold's death, and she had never mentioned any concerns about financial irregularities. In fact, she had repeatedly assured me that she looked forward to splitting the inheritance equally once her medical residency was secured. Carmen, at grandfather's funeral, didn't you promise me that we would split the inheritance equally? I said that before I understood the extent of what had happened with grandfather's finances. So you're saying you made that promise without having reviewed any of his financial records? Hoffman objected before Carmen could answer. Irrelevant to the current proceedings, Your Honor. Judge Hensley sustained the objection, but I could see that my questions had created some uncertainty about Carmen's timeline and knowledge of the supposed financial misconduct. The problem was that I still had no concrete evidence to prove the power of attorney was forged, or that Carmen's entire narrative was fabricated. Her story was internally consistent, even if the timeline seemed suspicious. But during the afternoon break, I made one more phone call that changed everything. I contacted the bank where Harold had kept his primary checking account and asked to speak with someone who could verify the power of attorney documents in their files. After being transferred to 3 different departments, I reached a supervisor named Michelle Torres, who had worked at the branch for over 15 years. When I described Harold and the time period in question, she immediately remembered him. Mr. Kowalski was one of our regular customers, Michelle said. I remember him very well because he always came in personally to handle his transactions. He never sent anyone else or used power of attorney arrangements. He was very particular about maintaining control of his own finances. Woody, are you saying there's no power of attorney on file for Harold Kowalski? Let me check our records, Michelle said. After a few minutes, she returned to the phone. We have no power of attorney documents for Harold Kowalski in our files. All withdrawals from his account during his final 2 years were made by Harold himself, either in person or using his ATM card. This information contradicted everything Carmen and Hoffman had presented in court. If Harold made all the withdrawals himself, then I couldn't have been stealing his money using fraudulent power of attorney documents. Michelle, would you be willing to provide written documentation of this information? I can fax you an official statement about the power of attorney status and withdrawal history if you have proper authorization. I asked Michelle to fax the bank records to the courthouse immediately. The fax arrived just as Judge Hensley was calling the afternoon session back to order. The bank documentation showed that Harold had made every withdrawal from his accounts personally with his own signature and identification. There were no transactions authorized by power of attorney because no such arrangement existed. Moreover, the withdrawal amounts and dates corresponded exactly to the tuition and expense payments I had been sending to Carmen throughout medical school. Harold had been systematically supporting Carmen's education using his own savings, supplementing the support I was providing through my warehouse wages. This revelation completely undermined Carmen's narrative. The money she claimed I had stolen was actually Harold's voluntary contribution to her medical education. The power of attorney documents presented by her attorney were completely fabricated. But I realized that exposing this fraud would require more than just bank records. Carmen had built her case on forged documents and false testimony. If she was willing to fabricate power of attorney papers, what other evidence might be fraudulent? I looked across the courtroom at Carmen, who was conferring quietly with Hoffman. She had no idea that her elaborate deception was about to unravel completely. The manila envelope in my jacket contained evidence that would expose not just the forged power of attorney, but the entire scope of Carmen's calculated betrayal. She was about to learn that lies, no matter how carefully constructed, eventually collapse under the weight of truth. As the afternoon session continued, Douglas Hoffman announced that he had one final piece of evidence that would definitively prove my unfitness to inherit anything from Harold's estate. His announcement sent a chill down my spine because I couldn't imagine what new fabrication Carmen had prepared. Your Honor, we have audio recordings that demonstrate Stefan Kowalski's true attitude toward his grandfather and his family obligations. These recordings reveal a pattern of manipulation and greed that makes his current claims about family devotion particularly disturbing. Hoffman produced a small digital audio player and requested permission to play the recordings for the court. Judge Hensley agreed, and suddenly my own voice filled the courtroom, discussing plans to take what's rightfully mine and complaining about supporting dead weight. I sat frozen in disbelief as distorted fragments of my own words painted me as someone motivated entirely by greed and resentment. The audio clips seemed to show me plotting to claim Harold's inheritance while expressing contempt for having to support Carmen's education. But as I listened more carefully, I realized what Carmen had done. These were fragments of real conversations we had shared over the years, but they had been heavily edited to remove all context and create completely false meanings. She had been secretly recording our private family phone calls for years, then splicing together words and phrases to fabricate evidence of misconduct. One particularly damaging clip seemed to show me saying, "I can't wait for the old man to die so we can get his money." But I remembered that actual conversation clearly. Carmen had called me from medical school crying because Harold had been hospitalized for cancer treatment. I had been trying to comfort her by saying that I couldn't wait for Harold's suffering to end peacefully, and that afterward we would honor his memory by using any inheritance to build the kind of lives he would have been proud of. Carmen's editing had removed every word about Harold's suffering my concern for his comfort, and my intentions to honor his memory. What remained was a grotesque distortion that made me sound callous and money-obsessed. Another clip appeared to show me calling Carmen dead weight, that I was tired of supporting. The actual conversation had been about my frustration with my warehouse supervisor, who was requiring employees to work unpaid overtime. I had told Carmen that I was tired of supporting deadweight management that exploited workers while contributing nothing to productivity. Carmen had edited out every reference to my job situation and workplace complaints, leaving only the phrase "supporting dead weight" attached to a completely different context that made it sound like I was describing her. These recordings demonstrate Stefan Kowalski's true character, Hoffman argued as the audio concluded. While presenting himself as a devoted brother and grandson, he was actually motivated by greed and resentment. His support for Carmen's education was calculated to position himself as the primary beneficiary of family resources. Carmen took the witness stand again to provide context for the recordings. Her testimony was masterfully designed to maximize the emotional impact of the manipulated audio. Listening to these recordings was the most painful experience of my life, she said, tears streaming down her face. To discover that my brother, who I trusted completely, had been talking about our grandfather with such cruelty and calculating our family's death for financial gain was heartbreaking. "How did you obtain these recordings?" Hoffman asked. "Stefan would call me regularly during medical school to discuss family matters and financial arrangements. I started recording some of our conversations because I wanted to remember his advice and support during difficult times. I never imagined I would discover this side of his personality." Carmen's explanation was plausible enough to fool someone who didn't know the truth. She presented the recordings as accidental discoveries made by someone who had been trying to preserve happy family memories, only to find evidence of betrayal and manipulation. "Carmen, based on these recordings and your other evidence, what do you believe would be the appropriate resolution of your grandfather's estate?" Hoffman asked. Carmen looked directly at me with an expression of pained disappointment. "Stefan needs to understand that his role in this family was never as an equal partner in inheritance decisions. Your only job is to sacrifice. That's your place in this family. You were never meant to be an equal. You were meant to serve, and you failed even at that." The courtroom fell silent as Carmen delivered those words with cold precision. She had rehearsed this moment carefully, knowing that her statement would be devastating both legally and emotionally. "My grandfather honored traditional family values," Carmen continued. "Stefan's purpose was to support the family member with the greatest potential for success and contribution to society. Instead of embracing that role with dignity, Stefan tried to manipulate the situation for personal gain." Hoffman nodded approvingly before delivering his final argument. "Your Honor, Carmen Kowalski has not only earned this inheritance through her professional achievements and dedication to family values, but Stefan Kowalski has forfeited any claim through his documented misconduct and betrayal of family trust. Furthermore," Hoffman continued, "we are prepared to seek additional damages beyond the inheritance dispute. Carmen Kowalski has suffered significant emotional distress from discovering her brother's deception and manipulation. We are requesting $50,000 in compensatory damages for the psychological trauma caused by Stefan's betrayal." The demand for additional damages beyond the inheritance was unexpected and devastating. Not only did Carmen want to claim Harold's entire estate, but she wanted me to pay her $50,000 for the emotional cost of her own elaborate lies. "Additionally, Your Honor, we are prepared to file criminal charges against Stefan Kowalski for elder abuse and financial exploitation. We have drafted a comprehensive complaint for the district attorney's office that documents his systematic theft from a vulnerable elderly relative." Hoffman produced a thick legal document that he claimed was a criminal complaint ready for filing. The threat was clear: if I continued to contest the inheritance, I would face potential imprisonment for elder abuse charges. Carmen's final testimony was designed to justify complete destruction of my life and future. Stefan has proven that he cannot be trusted with family responsibilities or financial resources. His punishment for betraying our grandfather's trust should be complete so that he learns the consequences of putting greed above family loyalty. The inheritance should go entirely to me because I have demonstrated worthiness through my medical career and dedication to healing others. Stefan should pay additional damages because his deception has caused me to question everything I believed about family love and trust. As Carmen concluded her testimony, she looked across the courtroom with an expression of satisfied vindication. She believed she had constructed an airtight case that would not only secure the full inheritance, but also destroy me financially and legally. Judge Hensley turned to me with a stern expression. Mr. Kowalski, do you have any evidence to present in your defense or any final testimony you wish to offer before I render my decision on this matter? I stood up slowly, my hands trembling, as I reached into my jacket pocket. The manila envelope contained evidence that would expose every lie Carmen had told, every document she had forged, and every recording she had manipulated. Carmen had made one crucial mistake in her elaborate deception. She had underestimated the power of truth and the possibility that her own words might someday be used against her. Your Honor, I do have evidence to present. Evidence that will show this court exactly who Carmen Kowalski really is and what she has actually done to our family. The expression of confidence on Carmen's face began to fade as she realized that I wasn't surrendering quietly to her demands. She had expected me to be overwhelmed by the scope of her accusations and evidence. Instead, I was preparing to fight back with the most powerful weapon available, the truth, documented in Carmen's own words. Judge Hensley looked at me with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity as I approached the bench with my manila envelope. After hours of devastating testimony and evidence from Carmen's legal team, my worn appearance and self-representation had clearly not impressed the court. Mr. Kowalski, I hope you have substantial evidence to present because the allegations against you are quite serious. Additionally, I want to ensure you understand the full scope of what you're facing here today. Douglas Hoffman rose from his seat with practiced courtroom authority. Your Honor, before the defendant presents any alleged evidence, I believe the court should understand the complete legal consequences of our findings today. Beyond the inheritance dispute and the $50,000 damage claim we discussed, we are also prepared to seek additional remedies. Based on the evidence of elder abuse and financial exploitation, we believe Stefan Kowalski should be ordered to pay full restitution for every dollar he obtained through fraudulent means. Hoffman produced a detailed financial calculation that claimed I had stolen over $80,000 from Harold through the forged power of attorney arrangement. According to their mathematics, I owed Harold's estate nearly twice the value of his entire life savings. Furthermore, Your Honor, we have already contacted the Cook County District Attorney's Office about filing criminal charges for elder abuse, financial exploitation, and fraud. The criminal complaint has been prepared and is ready for immediate filing upon the conclusion of this hearing. Carmen stood up from the plaintiff's table, her face composed in an expression of reluctant but determined justice-seeking. Your Honor, this legal action has been extremely difficult for me emotionally. Stefan was my brother, someone I trusted completely and depended on during the most challenging period of my life. But I cannot allow his betrayal of our grandfather's trust to go unpunished simply because of family sentiment. Harold Kowalski deserves justice, and our family deserves protection from Stefan's manipulative behavior. Carmen's voice began to break with apparent emotion as she delivered what sounded like a prepared statement. The most painful part of this entire experience has been realizing that my brother saw me not as family, to be loved and supported, but as an investment to be exploited for eventual financial gain. Stefan calculated that supporting my medical education would position him to claim a larger share of family resources. When that calculation didn't work out as planned, he attempted to steal directly from our grandfather's accounts using forged legal documents. Judge Hensley appeared, moved by Carmen's testimony. Ms. Kowalski, I can see that this family dispute has caused you considerable distress. However, I must also allow your brother to present any evidence he believes supports his position. Carmen looked directly at me with an expression of pained but resolute determination. Your Honor, I understand that Stefan will probably try to deny everything and create new lies to cover his previous deceptions. That's what manipulative people do when they're caught. But I want the court to know that no matter what Stefan claims, his fundamental role in this family has never changed. Stefan's only job is to sacrifice. That's his place in this family, and that's what he should have continued to do with dignity, instead of trying to elevate himself above his natural position. Carmen's words echoed the cruel statement from the thumbnail description delivered with cold precision in front of Judge Hensley. She wanted to make absolutely clear that she considered me inherently inferior and deserving of nothing beyond a life of service to her ambitions. If Stefan had accepted his role as a supporter, rather than trying to become an equal partner in family decisions, none of this legal action would have been necessary. His greed and sense of entitlement forced me to take steps to protect our grandfather's legacy. Hoffman nodded approvingly before delivering his most devastating threat yet. Your Honor, we are requesting that the court order immediate enforcement of our claims. Stefan Kowalski should be prohibited from accessing any portion of Harold Kowalski's estate while the criminal investigation proceeds. Additionally, we believe Stefan Kowalski presents a continuing danger to other elderly family members. We are seeking a protective order that would prevent him from having unsupervised contact with any relatives over the age of 65. The scope of Carmen's demands was breathtaking in its cruelty and comprehensiveness. She wasn't content with simply claiming the inheritance. She wanted to brand me as a criminal, isolate me from all family relationships, and ensure that I could never recover financially or socially from her accusations. Your Honor, we believe Stefan Kowalski's pattern of manipulation and exploitation represents a clear and present danger to vulnerable family members. The protective order we're seeking would serve both as punishment for his documented misconduct and protection for potential future victims. Judge Hensley looked at me with an expression that suggested she was already leaning heavily toward granting Carmen's requests. Mr. Kowalski, these are extremely serious allegations with potentially severe consequences. I strongly advise you to consider whether you want to proceed with presenting evidence or whether you might prefer to negotiate a settlement that acknowledges wrongdoing and provides appropriate restitution. I realized that Carmen and Hoffman were trying to pressure me into accepting a settlement that would admit guilt and avoid a criminal investigation. They wanted me to surrender completely without forcing them to risk having their fabricated evidence examined too closely. Your Honor, I respectfully decline any settlement that requires me to admit wrongdoing that I did not commit. I have evidence that will prove every allegation made against me today is false. Carmen's expression shifted from confident vindication to something approaching concern. She had expected me to be overwhelmed by the scope of her accusations and legal threats. Additionally, Your Honor, my evidence will prove that Carmen Kowalski has committed perjury, document fraud, and systematic deception in order to steal an inheritance that rightfully belongs to both of us equally. The courtroom fell silent as I made this counter-accusation. Hoffman looked genuinely surprised that I was willing to go on the offensive rather than simply defending against Carmen's charges. Mr. Kowalski, those are very serious accusations to make without substantial proof, Judge Hensley warned. I hope you understand that false allegations against the plaintiff could result in additional legal consequences for you. I opened the manila envelope and removed its contents carefully. Inside were printed emails, audio files, and digital records that would expose every aspect of Carmen's elaborate fraud. Your Honor, the evidence I'm about to present consists entirely of Carmen Kowalski's own words and actions. She has documented her deception so thoroughly that I don't need to prove anything beyond what she has already admitted in her own voice. Carmen's face had gone pale as she realized that I possessed evidence she didn't know about. Her confident demeanor was beginning to crack as she tried to imagine what I might have discovered. This evidence comes from digital files stored on our grandfather's old computer files that Carmen created while planning her fraudulent lawsuit. She believed these files were destroyed, but they were automatically backed up to cloud storage that I inherited, along with Harold's other possessions. For the first time all day, Carmen looked genuinely afraid. She was beginning to understand that her careful planning might have left digital traces that could destroy her entire case. Judge Hensley gestured for me to approach the bench. Mr. Kowalski, you may present your evidence to the court. I walked toward the judge's bench knowing that the next few minutes would either vindicate 7 years of sacrifice and love or confirm Carmen's portrait of me as a failed and criminal family member. Behind me, I could hear Carmen whispering urgently to Hoffman, probably trying to prepare new explanations for whatever I was about to reveal. But she had no idea how comprehensive and damning her own documentation of fraud really was. The truth was about to speak for itself in Carmen's own voice. I handed Judge Hensley the contents of my manila envelope with hands that were surprisingly steady despite everything I had endured that day. The envelope contained printed emails, digital audio files, and cloud storage records that Carmen had unknowingly created while planning her elaborate fraud. Your Honor, these documents come from our grandfather Harold's old computer and email account. When Carmen was preparing her false evidence, she used Harold's computer because her own laptop was having technical problems. She didn't realize that Harold's cloud storage account was automatically backing up every file she created. Judge Hensley examined the printed emails while I explained their significance. These emails show Carmen uploading and editing audio files to create the recordings she presented as evidence against me. The original unedited files are also included, along with Carmen's voice memos, describing her plans to manipulate the recordings. The first audio file I requested the court to play was one of Carmen's voice memos dated from 6 months ago. Carmen's voice filled the courtroom, but this time she was speaking freely and honestly about her intentions. I've been working on editing Stefan's phone calls to make him sound greedy and manipulative, Carmen's recorded voice explained. The idiot actually believes family loyalty matters. He has no idea I've been planning to take everything since grandfather died. The courtroom fell completely silent as Carmen's own words revealed her calculated deception. On the recording, she described me as pathetically easy to manipulate and laughed about how stupid I was to sacrifice my education for her medical career. Stefan gave up his whole future for me, and now I'm going to use that sacrifice to destroy him. He'll end up with nothing, and I'll have everything. The inheritance, the medical degree he paid for, and the satisfaction of proving he was always beneath me. Judge Hensley's expression shifted from skepticism to shock, as Carmen's true character was revealed through her own admissions. Carmen sat at the plaintiff's table looking pale and desperate, realizing that her most private thoughts were being broadcast in the courtroom where she had expected to achieve total victory. The next audio file contained Carmen's detailed discussion of forging the power of attorney documents. I found samples of grandfather's signature on old Christmas cards and birthday checks. With some practice, I can reproduce his handwriting well enough to fool a casual examination. The notary seal was easy to copy using graphic design software. Carmen's voice on the recording was casual and matter-of-fact as she described committing multiple felonies. The beauty of this plan is that it creates a paper trail showing Stefan had legal access to grandfather's accounts. When I claim he stole money, the forged power of attorney makes it look like he abused a position of trust. But the most damaging revelation came in Carmen's discussion of Harold's final months and her attitude toward his suffering. Grandfather's cancer treatments make him confused sometimes, which is actually convenient for my plans. He's taking strong pain medications that affect his memory, so he might not remember exactly what legal documents he signed or when. I'm timing the inheritance lawsuit for maximum impact. By the time I file, Stefan will look like a warehouse worker trying to steal from his successful doctor sister. No judge will believe his word against mine. Judge Hensley stopped the audio playback and looked directly at Carmen. Ms. Kowalski, are these recordings authentic? Is this your voice describing plans to forge legal documents and manipulate evidence? Carmen tried to maintain her composure, but her voice cracked as she answered. Your Honor, I was under tremendous stress from medical school and residency applications. Sometimes people say things they don't mean when they're overwhelmed. So you're confirming that this is your voice, but claiming you didn't mean what you said, Judge Hensley asked with obvious skepticism. Douglas Hoffman stood up clearly, trying to salvage what had become an impossible situation. Your Honor, these recordings appear to have been obtained without my client's knowledge or consent. We question their admissibility and their relevance to the inheritance dispute. I retrieved another document from my envelope. Your Honor, these recordings were created voluntarily by Carmen, using our grandfather's computer equipment. As the inheritor of Harold's estate, I have legal access to any files stored on his devices. Additionally, Carmen herself presented secretly recorded conversations as evidence against me, establishing that such recordings are relevant to these proceedings. Judge Hensley reviewed the technical documentation showing when and how the files were created. Mr. Hoffman, your client presented secretly recorded audio as primary evidence in this case. She cannot now claim that similar recordings are inadmissible when they contradict her testimony. The judge requested that I play the final and most damaging audio file. This recording captured Carmen's true feelings about me and her plans for my complete destruction. Stefan thinks his warehouse job makes him some kind of family hero. Carmen's voice sneered. He actually believes I'm grateful for his support. The truth is, I've always resented having to depend on someone so beneath my potential. When this inheritance case is over, Stefan will understand his real place in this family. He was never meant to be an equal. He was meant to serve my success and then disappear when no longer useful. Carmen's recorded voice continued with chilling calculation. I'm not just taking the inheritance money. I'm destroying Stefan completely. Financially, legally, and socially. The criminal charges will ensure he can never recover from this. He'll spend the rest of his life paying for the crime of thinking he deserved more than a life of sacrifice. The courtroom was completely silent as Carmen's genuine personality was revealed through her own words. The caring, grieving granddaughter she had portrayed in her testimony was exposed as an elaborate performance designed to cover ruthless manipulation. Judge Hensley's voice was cold with anger when she addressed Carmen directly. Ms. Kowalski, these recordings demonstrate that you have committed perjury, document fraud, and attempted theft through deception. You have wasted this court's time with fabricated evidence and false testimony. Carmen tried one final desperate defense. Your Honor, those recordings are taken out of context. I was expressing frustration, not describing actual plans. Judge Hensley looked at Carmen with disgust. Ms. Kowalski, your own voice describes forging your grandfather's signature, fabricating power of attorney documents, and planning to file false criminal charges against your brother. This is not frustration. This is detailed documentation of criminal conspiracy. The judge turned to address the full courtroom. Not only is Stefan Kowalski entitled to his full share of Harold Kowalski's inheritance, but Carmen Kowalski's fraudulent lawsuit has caused significant damages that must be remedied. Carmen Kowalski is hereby ordered to pay Stefan Kowalski $50,000 in restitution for the educational expenses he covered during her medical training. These expenses were obtained through false pretenses and emotional manipulation. Carmen's face crumpled as she realized the full extent of her defeat. Not only had she lost the inheritance lawsuit, but she was being ordered to pay me compensation for supporting her education. Judge Hensley continued her ruling with obvious satisfaction. Additionally, Carmen Kowalski's forged documents and false testimony constitute serious criminal offenses. I am referring this matter to the Cook County District Attorney for immediate investigation of perjury, document fraud, and attempted theft by deception. The judge's final statement contained the moment of laughter referenced in the thumbnail. When Carmen desperately pleaded for leniency, claiming she had been under stress from medical school, Judge Hensley actually laughed out loud. Ms. Kowalski, your own recordings prove that your actions were calculated and premeditated over a period of months. This was not stress-related behavior. This was criminal conspiracy executed with remarkable thoroughness. As the hearing concluded, I learned that the consequences for Carmen extended far beyond the courtroom. The medical residency program at Cedars-Sinai was notified of the court findings, and Carmen faced potential suspension or termination from her position. State medical licensing boards take fraud and elder abuse allegations extremely seriously. Carmen's medical license was under review, and she might never be allowed to practice medicine despite the education I had sacrificed to provide. 3 months later, I sat in Harold's house, now legally mine, reading a final letter that had been hidden in the manila envelope along with the digital evidence. Harold had written the letter during his final weeks, somehow sensing that Carmen might challenge his will after his death. Stefan. The letter read, "If you're reading this, it means Carmen has tried to take what rightfully belongs to both of you. I hope you found the computer files I saved before she could delete them. I was never as confused by the cancer medication as she believed. Your sacrifice for Carmen's education was the most beautiful expression of family love I ever witnessed. You gave up your own dreams to support hers, never asking for recognition or reward. That kind of selfless devotion is the true family legacy I want remembered. Carmen never understood that love freely given is different from obligation demanded. You chose to support her because you believed in family bonds. She chose to betray you because she never valued those bonds at all. I'm proud to have a grandson who understands that family means protecting and supporting each other, not exploiting and destroying each other." The letter concluded with Harold's blessing for me to pursue the college education I had postponed. Use the inheritance and whatever justice brings to build the life you deserve. Don't let Carmen's betrayal make you bitter about love and sacrifice. The world needs people who understand the difference between service and exploitation. Today, I'm finishing my sophomore year in mechanical engineering at University of Illinois, funded by the inheritance and Carmen's court-ordered restitution. I changed my major to paralegal studies after witnessing firsthand how legal knowledge can protect people from fraud and manipulation. Carmen's medical license was permanently revoked after the criminal investigation revealed additional instances of fraud during her medical school applications. She currently works as a medical research assistant in California, earning a fraction of what she expected from her doctor career. The painful lesson I learned is that love and sacrifice don't automatically create gratitude in the people you help. Sometimes they create resentment in people who refuse to acknowledge their debts to others. But I also learned that standing up for truth and justice doesn't require abandoning the values that made you willing to sacrifice in the first place. Harold was right about the difference between service and exploitation. True family members support each other's dreams and celebrate each other's successes. False family members view love as weakness and use sacrifice as evidence of inferiority. Carmen thought my willingness to sacrifice proved I was beneath her. She never understood that my greatest strength wasn't my ability to give up my dreams for others, but my determination to fight for what's right when it truly matters. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever sacrificed for a family member who later betrayed your trust? How did you handle discovering that someone you loved had been manipulating your generosity? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might help others recognize similar patterns in their own relationships. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button to help others find it. Subscribe to this channel for more true stories about family conflicts, legal battles, and justice, prevailing against deception. And please share this video with anyone who might be facing similar challenges with manipulative family members. Thank you for listening to my story, and for understanding that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to let others exploit your capacity for sacrifice. I hope my experience helps you recognize your own worth and find the strength to fight for truth when it matters most. Remember that your kindness and generosity are gifts to be valued, not weaknesses to be exploited. Never let anyone convince you that your role in life is simply to sacrifice without recognition, respect, or reciprocal care. Take care of yourselves and never forget that you deserve to be treated with the same love and respect that you give to others.